At its core, economics is the study of how humans make decisions in the face of scarcity. Those decisions relate to individuals, families, and businesses, as well as societal and government interests. Most of us ask, is my job secure? Can I afford a mortgage or rent? Should I buy a car or a bike? Perhaps walk? My gosh, the price of groceries is through the roof. Can I afford to eat out? What about going out for dinner? Can I afford just to eat? Well, I hope so. Hello, I'm Stuart McNish, and you're listening to Conversations Live. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series addressing the big issues of our time. For each episode, we bring together subject matter experts for a deep conversation designed to provide you with information that helps you make more informed decisions. I hope you enjoy it. Tonight we come to you from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations, who have lived on and continue to call these lands home. Osiam. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series that seeks to advance our understanding of the big issues of our times. We also strive to draw attention to organizations that make a difference in our community. Tonight I want to introduce you to Mission Possible, which transforms lives through meaningful work by empowering those people who have typically been excluded from the workforce due to a series of issues such as homelessness or housing insecurity, poverty, and other barriers to employment. Mission Possible paves a pathway to long-term employment and jobs that change lives. Joining us tonight from Mission Possible is Chief Empowerment Officer, Reverend Matthew Smedley. I encourage you to reach out to him this evening, pick up some of the literature he has brought to share, and where possible, seek to find ways to support Mission Possible. It's a great organization. Tonight, we have representatives from the three parties in this election, along with two business association representatives, as we focus on the economic plans of the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Green Party. At its core, economics is the study of how humans make decisions in the face of scarcity. Those decisions relate to individuals, families, and businesses, as well as societal and government interests. Most of us ask, is my job secure? Can I afford a mortgage or rent? Should I buy a car or a bike? Perhaps walk? My gosh, the price of groceries is through the roof. Can I afford to eat out? What about going out for dinner? Can I afford just to eat? Well, I hope so. A recent Research Co. poll showed that the soaring cost of food is forcing more and more people to set aside environmental concerns about food production when making a purchasing decision. It's all adding up. RF, can you please play the $25 hamburger clip from Ian Tostenson?
We're seeing compression on margins. So, all of the stuff in our businesses are going up, heat, gas, light, rent, all that stuff. Labor costs. Some is being caused by governments. So here we're seeing inflation being driven by 10-day sick leave and, and employer health tax and putting up the minimum wage. All those things take their toll. The problem we have is that we're getting to a $25 hamburger.
Government programs that add an extra $6.5 billion in increased costs thanks to a rise in corporate rates, an expansion of paid sick leave, healthcare premiums, and the business portion of the escalating carbon tax, which could rise even further if the consumer carbon tax is dropped. Add in a 21% rise in minimum wage and a new statutory holiday. Combined, it all adds up to significant cost increases for businesses. So what does it all mean? What does it all mean to you? RF, let's go to the poll that our good friend Mario Canseco of Research Co. has put together for us.
We asked British Columbians about the way the current BC government is managing specific industry sectors. More than half told us they are satisfied with the way tourism and technology are being handled, while almost half feel the same way about natural gas and construction. On 4 other sectors, the results are not as encouraging. Only 2 in 5 BC residents are content with the way the BC government is managing international education and mining, while the results are marginally better for agri-foods and forestry. At this moment, BC residents are more likely to believe that the financial situation in their household is better than the overall state of the BC economy. Still, almost 3 in 5 residents think BC's economic outlook is poor at the moment, and just over half are dissatisfied with the state of their household's finances. BC residents are divided when thinking about what the future will bring to their household, with almost half expecting no change in their financial standing and similar proportions foreseeing better or worse days ahead. The forecast is grimmer on the provincial economy, with almost 3 in 10 BC residents expecting the economic conditions to decline over the next 6 months. In the early years of this century, British Columbia was usually ahead of other Canadian provinces on most economic indicators. Right now, just over a third of BC residents believe that our own economy is not performing as well as those in other Canadian jurisdictions, while only 17% believe we are doing better. Just days away from an election, BC residents cannot agree on what to do to balance the budget. While a third would prefer to raise taxes, more than 2 in 5 are in favor of cutting programs. As expected, those who are planning to vote for the governing BC NDP in this year's ballot are more likely to endorse tax increases, while 3 in 5 of those who are planning to vote for the BC Conservatives would prefer to cut programs. BC Green Party supporters are somewhere in the middle, but leaning away from tax hikes. For Conversations Live, I'm Mario Canseco from ResearchGo.
I find it interesting only 17% of people in BC believe the province is a top performing economy in Canada. Now to our panel. Tonight, joining me are Sonia Furstenau of the BC Green Party, who has stepped in for Adam Olsen, who unfortunately has COVID. Mo Sahota of the BC NDP, Yuri Fulmer of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, David Williams of the Business Council of British Columbia, and Jairo Yunus of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Now, just to set the stage just a little bit further, we have a list of questions, as I mentioned to our in-person audience, that were presented to the 3 parties by the Vancouver Sun. We are using those same questions tonight as the framework of our conversation. However, as always, you are invited to send us your questions via Slido. Please go to slido.com and enter the password Conversations Live, and Sean Hall, our Slido master, will review them and forward them to me, and also present some of those questions where possible. So, one other variation to our normal format. Normally, I just pose questions to all of the people on the panel, but tonight I'm going to pose the questions to each of the candidates and then ask Jairo and David for their responses and follow-up queries to the candidates if they feel that they would like a little more clarification. So, Mr. Sahota, you are the representative of the party that is the incumbent, so I'm going to start with you.
Go right ahead.
This is a business productivity question. Business investment and wage growth. According to the Bank of Canada, they're worried about Canada's productivity emergency and the lack of investment. How would your government encourage more business investment, job creation, and higher wages in British Columbia?
Okay, good question. There's a number of ways to deal with that issue. First of all, let's just take a look at the baseline numbers. In the last year that we have statistics, in 22-23, we attracted $117 billion of private capital investment in British Columbia. That's 73% higher than in the last year of the previous government in 26-2017. Our wages, the average hourly wage in British Columbia is the highest in Canada at $36.15. So I'm not talking about the minimum wage, I'm talking about the hourly wage. Since 2017, we've created 250,000 jobs, the majority of those in the private sector, and also in the self-employed sector. The ones in the public sector have been generally in the areas of health and education, which of course are areas that we have to attend to. Our GDP growth at 16% is better than all of the other provinces in Canada, including Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta. Our debt to GDP ratio is actually 1/2 of that of Ontario and Quebec. Our unemployment rate in British Columbia is 5.8%, third best in the country, below the 6.6% rate across the country. And our credit rating is the highest of any province in the country. So when you take a look at the basic metrics of where we are, we've actually done a very good job in terms of positioning ourselves as the strongest economy. But I do think that too much time in this election campaign has been spent on talking about how we can help people get by. That's important. We can talk more about that later on. But we haven't been talking enough about how it is that we can get ahead. And getting ahead means having a sound economic policy and a vision around the economy. And so we live in a competitive marketplace globally. We have to decide which are the niches that we think we can attract to British Columbia to make sure that people, businesses, and families prosper. And there are a number of niches that we're working on as a government that are TRA priorities for us. There are life sciences, critical minerals, there are mass timber, film, and television. And let me just use the first one of those as an example, because I think it really is the star of our economy. In terms of life sciences, we've seen a 27% growth in that sector. We right now have 20,000 jobs in that sector. We're forecast to get to 50,000 jobs in that sector. You asked about productivity and investment. We have a company in British Columbia by the name of Aspect Bioproducts. What do they do? It's really fascinating. They actually produce organ tissues to be able to fix your own organ. And they are looking at ways in which to use your own tissue to be able to help your organs heal. That company is a star in British Columbia. And recently it received, to go to your question about private investment, an investment of $3.2 billion. That's the largest biotech sector investment ever made in the history of this country, right here in British Columbia. We have other companies in that sector that I can talk about in more detail. But I'm going to end there. I'm just going to say this by in sort of wrapping it all up. I'm going to try tonight to go through each one of those sectors just to demonstrate how buoyant, successful, and hopeful and promising the economy is. We live in the best place in British Columbia. The world wants to come here, and we have to make sure that we create a tax competitive environment, reduce red tape, pay off our deficit, all of which we can talk about tonight, and attract this kind of investment to this province. We've been doing it. We'll continue to do it. The record shows that.
Thank you. Ms. Firstenow.
So when we think about productivity and we think about what conditions really work for people and the economy really is should be focused on both the people and the businesses. When people feel that they can take risks, when people feel that they are secure, when people feel that they have that kind of safety net, then they can be a lot more productive. I think about times in my own life when I felt a lot of uncertainty. If I was moving and I was a single parent and I didn't know where we were going to be living in 3 weeks, my productivity really went off a cliff. And so when we look at the conditions in British Columbia for a lot of people right now, that sense of security, that sense of knowing that their basic needs are going to be met, that sense of being able to feel like they can take some risks is really limited for too many people. And I think that that's something that we have to consider when we're talking about productivity. The other thing about productivity is about businesses and the ways in which they're reinvesting into the communities. And we've seen a lot of businesses, especially making, big profits, take those profits and hand them over to shareholders rather than reinvest them back into the communities, back into their businesses, back into creating more activity and more opportunity. And so there's a combination that we should be looking at when we're thinking about productivity. And this is where government plays a really important role. How can government ensure that people who are doing the work in British Columbia, that are working for businesses, are themselves feeling that level of security and safety to be able to feel the most productive they can. So knowing that you have healthcare, knowing that there's going to be affordable housing, knowing that there's transportation available to you, knowing that your government is effectively spending its money to deliver services to you. And that's what we're very focused on.
Yuri, same question to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I never thought I'd say this, but I agree with Mo Sahoda on a point. This is the best place to live in the world. British Columbia is an amazing province. And Mo, with respect, listed a lot of statistics that, in his view, should demonstrate to voters how well off they are. That's not what we're hearing. We're hearing from people that there's an affordability crisis, not an affordability challenge, not an affordability opportunity, but there's an affordability crisis. I talk to voters on the doorsteps who can't afford rent, who are making grocery decisions for their children that they should never have to make. We know that 1 in 3 young British Columbians is, quote, seriously considering the province. Not thinking about it, seriously considering it. Half of young British Columbians and 1/3 of all working British Columbians are considering leaving the province. They're not doing that because this isn't the most beautiful place on earth. They're doing that because they can't afford to live here. And with respect to give me a second, Mo, with respect to a long list of statistics that Mo, I think, thinks point to success in the economy. We have a deficit that's incredible. We're the 4th highest tax jurisdiction in North America, and we have people who can't afford their rent. So with respect, I don't think that British Columbians feel that the economy is on the right track, and I don't think they feel that there's an opportunity. And I agree with Sonia. In a time like this where people don't feel safe, secure, that they can pay their bills, of course they're not productive. So we're in a place where, for the first time in history, Calgary did more venture capital deals last year than Vancouver. Where in British Columbia, I heard about job creation, but we know that for every 0.8 of a private sector job in British Columbia, 5.1 public sector jobs were created. That is not a thriving economy. It's not wrong. It's not a thriving economy. That's not how the economy works. It works when business is able to thrive and create great, well-paying jobs for British Columbians so that they can afford to live in this province. That is when the economy is working for us.
So, Mo, you want to jump in?
Sure.
I know, Sonia, you want to as well.
The question was about getting ahead, but let me deal with the getting by portion of it, which deals with the financial insecurity that people feel as they go from month to month. So let's talk about what we're doing about that. First and foremost, we are advancing on childcare. We've created 69,000 families in British Columbia are now saving $1,600 per month per child in terms of childcare costs because of initiatives that we brought forward. 12,500 $10 a day programs have been created. The Premier has already indicated during the course of this election campaign that we're going to be providing before and after school care in schools. 100,000 women that weren't in our workforce are now in that workforce because of childcare. It's designed to bring down the cost of living. We've eliminated tolls, as you know, on highways. We've reduced ICBC rates. We've increased the minimum wage to the highest in Canada. We've capped rent increases at rates below the rate of inflation. So when you take a look at the full list of things that we've done to date, they've been attentive to the concerns that people have. Have we been able to totally remove economic insecurity? Of course not. That's why, for example, in this campaign, we're offering a $1,000 rebate for all families beginning right after the election. But the fundamental reason why we have this problem is because of housing. And the only way we're going to solve the housing crisis in British Columbia is by increasing the supply of housing. We're building more homes in British Columbia. We have a plan to build 300,000. We've brought in the speculation vacancy tax. It took 30,000 empty condos that were empty and converted them into housing for people. We've limited Airbnb. That's taken 20,000 units of housing and put them into the marketplace to create homes for middle-class families. Your party wants to spend and one other thing I'd say before I go to your party, and we put forward an innovative program in this election where we say to people, to newcomers, if you want to buy a home, we will pay 40% of the purchase price of that home. You'll only have to finance 60% of it. We'll recover the money upon sale of the property. Your party has put forward a.
Okay, Mo.
Let me add on this final point. Your party has put forward a proposal to expend $3.5 billion on a housing program that does not create one unit of housing. We have a supply problem here.
Okay,
We're solving it. You're not.
We'll come to that a little bit later. But Sonia wanted to jump in. Just hang on a second.
Okay. Mo really likes numbers. So let's look at some numbers. In Victoria, a one-bedroom apartment in 2017, the average price was $988. There was a 0.7% vacancy rate at that point. Today, there's a 1.6% vacancy rate, and the average price of a one-bedroom is $2,160. There's been more supply added since 2017. The vacancy rate is higher. So if the market was working the way we think it would be working, then why has rent more than doubled? Mo says, well, we've capped rent increases to inflation, except rent increases between tenancies. And what we've seen in Victoria, what we've seen in Vancouver and across this province is an enormous amount of rental housing being bought by real estate investment trusts. Those real estate investment trusts finding ways to get people evicted because they can jack up the rent enormously in between tenancies. And we've lost an incredible amount of what was affordable housing in our cities and our towns. And neither of these other two parties want to talk about the role that financialization of housing has played in the cost of living in this province. And until we take steps that ensure that there is enough non-market housing, as we see in places like Venice or Singapore or what Paris has done to ensure that people can afford to live in all of the communities in this province. And until we take steps to ensure that there are limits of what the rent increases can be between tenancies in the form of vacancy control, we are going to be trapped in this cycle. And all the conversation about supply just sounds so simple, right? We just need to build more supply. No jurisdiction in North America has built more supply than Vancouver in the last 20 years. And Vancouver has some of the highest real estate costs in North America. It's not just supply. We've allowed housing to become a commodity. And until we have governments that say, hey, actually, people need a place to live, and we're going to take steps to make sure that happens, we're going to be trapped in this very vicious cycle.
Yuri.
Yeah, I love listening to statistics from Mo because I think Mo's trying to use statistics to explain to British Columbians that somehow that they're wrong, that even though they don't have enough money to afford rent, even though, as Sonia said, rents have escalated beyond belief, that in fact somehow miraculously the numbers are telling them that they're better off than they believe they are. It's just simply not true. British Columbians are worse off today than they were 7 years ago. And Mo can talk about all of the programs that they're doing and that they've done. The reality is 7 years of NDP government has made British Columbians materially, financially worse off. That's the reality. And so you can project into the future all you like, but you've been in government for 7 years. You had the chance to do all of these things. You're launching policies 3 weeks before an election. You're cutting taxes on the fly. You're launching new programs 2 weeks out before an election. You've had 7 years. You wanted to solve housing supply. 7 years is a material amount of time to solve housing supply, but you didn't do it. So why would British Columbians believe now that the statistics you're throwing at them convince them that while they can't afford groceries, they're actually materially better off, and that you're going to do something in the next 4 years that you didn't do in the last 7 years? That doesn't make sense to British Columbians.
I got to go to David Williams and Hyro, who are they're anxious to jump in here too. So, David, I'll go to you, and then Hyro.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. Just for a bit of context, the federal government has been pushing this very strong population growth agenda. So we're getting population growth of about 3%. We haven't seen anything like that since about 1957-58, which was the Hungarian Revolution and the Suez Canal crisis. This is a policy decision, though. So we've got a national economy, a national population growing by about 3%. That's the same in BC. So if you have a larger population, you get GDP growth. So looking just at top-line GDP growth is really the wrong way to look at it in this environment. You need to look at the size of the economic pie, the per capita GDP. Right? GDP is just the total income that households and businesses produce in an economy in a year. And we care about that on a per capita basis because, as the other panelists have said, that's what we take to the grocery store. That's what we use to pay for rent, to pay for mortgages, to fill up the car when we try and do the school run. All these things, that's what and to pay our taxes to fund our public services. Okay, so what's happening to per capita GDP? Right, you've got population growth growing at around 3%, and then Canada's top line GDP growing at 1%, which means in per capita terms, the economy is shrinking at a rate of 2% a year. It's the second worst economy in the OECD over the past 5 years, and is expected to be the worst performing economy in the OECD. There are 38 advanced countries in the OECD. It's expected to be the worst economy with the lowest growth in per capita incomes for the next 40 years, according to the OECD itself. So it's a pretty bleak outlook. In BC, GDP is about 1.5%, population growth is 3%, so the economy is only shrinking at a rate of 1.5%, right? So in the Canadian context, we look pretty good, right? But that's not how people feel. We had 200,000 people visiting food banks last year. That's up nearly 60% on 2019, and over a third of them are children, who are only 17% of BC's population. So I think that's a clue. And we've got numbers of people leaving the province. 70,000 people left the province last year. We normally attract people on net to BC, current residents, that is, from the rest of Canada. We're losing current residents to the rest of Canada on net. So I think that's another canary in the coal mine. And I'll just finish by saying, I think one of the questions I would have for the candidates is, when you go to the government's own forecasts, February's budget, if you look at page 99 to be specific, or if you look at the first quarterly report the government released in September, page 55, if anyone wants to have a look, there are some numbers there for real per capita incomes. And per capita incomes fell in 2023. They're expected to fall again this year. And in 2028, they're expected to be lower than they were in 2022. So the government's own forecasts are saying that we have falling and stagnating living standards. And you're seeing that in the food bank data. You're seeing that in the numbers of people who are choosing to not just think about leaving the province, but actually they are voting with their feet and they are leaving the province. Now, the population's growing, as I mentioned, because we've got net international migration, but current residents aren't feeling that they can make a go of it here in the province. So that's a very long way preamble, but my question is, you've got per capita incomes expected to stagnate according to the government's own forecast in its budgets. What is the plan for getting that figure rising again so that people feel like they are getting ahead rather than falling behind?
Well, that kind of comes back to the original question. What can you do to increase productivity and encourage wage growth? But hang on, I got to let Jairo add fuel to the fire here, because you guys are raring to go.
Thank you, Stuart. And I want to bring it back to our investment question, so thank you. I want to put some context, add some context to the investment landscape in the province. And to David's point of accounting for the size of our economy and the size of our workforce. As a share of our economy, business investment in machinery and equipment back in 2012 was around 4.2%. In 2022, that went down to 3.6% of our economy. Business investment in machinery and equipment per private sector worker was around $6,000 back in 2012. In 2022 was around $5,400. That's a 10% reduction. So just wanted to add a little bit of context on those investment figures. And my question also to the party representatives as well is, what kind of fiscal tools or regulatory tools are there available for the government to kind of spur this private investment?
Which in many ways comes back to our original question. So Yuri, we'll start with you and we'll work our way back.
Sure, but my first observation would be, does it not feel like the province that my two colleagues here described and the province Mo described, they might as well be in different planets? Like the observations that they're both making are so disparate and so far apart as it feels like they're actually describing a different province. So somebody's right and somebody's not right. I mean, David's Australian, so he must be right. But like this...
upside down.
Me too. But the stark contrast of using statistics to describe a province are absolutely unbelievable. And I'd reflect that if that's how the NDP is viewing our province, and that's the lens that they're putting on it, we're in serious trouble going forward.
So to the question though, Yuri, what can you do to actually spur that kind of investment which will fuel wage growth?
Yeah, it's a great question, Stuart. I mean, you put up a slide with how British Columbians feel about how the government's handling business. I would challenge that if you actually ask those businesses how they feel government's handling the business, you'd get a very different response. I mean, the public's negative generally, the business community is even more negative. Business community is burdened with regulation that is so onerous as to scare most businesses from wanting to invest, right? There hasn't been a meaningful investment in the forestry sector in British Columbia in 20 years, in the mining sector in 25 years. You know, British Columbia has told the world that our regulatory environment is such that British Columbia is closed for business. With a tax rate of 53.5 cents in the dollar, we're telling people, do not come here, do not invest here. We're going to take more of the money that you make. It's just not worth it. So what do we do is we try and undo it.
Sonia.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on here. I think Yuri's point about using statistics to describe realities is definitely a challenge, and we've seen that in this election. We see a lot of numbers and statistics being thrown around, and I think one of the answers I have in response to this is how do we measure the work that government's doing? That's what we're proposing with a well-being framework, well-being budgeting. We've seen this in New Zealand, in Scotland, in Iceland, recognizing that government's job is really first and foremost oriented to serving the people and making sure that the people can be in the position to be thriving, to be productive, to have that certainty. And then when it comes to businesses, I think what we need is a clear and effective regulatory system. Yeah, we have lots of regulations, but we also have lots of reports from the Auditor General saying we don't enforce those regulations very effectively. And I've seen that up close and personal in Shawnigan Lake. We saw it in Mount Polley. We see it in the forestry practices where lots of rules, but those rules are not being enforced. And then we see, the BC NDP in the last 7 years has been chasing a sunset industry. They've been chasing LNG while the rest of the world is turning to clean energy. I think about Australia and all the clean energy, solar energy they're exporting to Singapore, and the backing away from LNG in Australia because they realize this is not going to be the path forward for our economy. And now we have more and more evidence, not only from the International Energy Agency, that the demand for this gas is going to decline by the end of this decade, but we have another peer-reviewed study from Cornell saying that it is in no way better than coal. It's actually got higher emissions than coal. So this whole greenwashing story that BC's been trying to sell with lobbyists like Mo Sahoda for the LNG industry is that we're somehow doing the world a favor by fracking a lot of gas in the Northeast, when in fact what we should have been investing in for the last 7 years, and it breaks my heart to think that we haven't been doing this, is a clean energy economy where we'd be building those clean energy facilities all over the province, in communities everywhere, build that resilience, and then use that energy to fund and fuel in much less expensive and much less affected by global prices and the kind of price shocks we saw after the invasion of Ukraine. Put ourselves first as an economy and make sure that we are investing in the energy abundance that we could have in BC, and then the what that could fuel. If Mo is talking about biomedics and research and innovation, if we had businesses knowing that you're going to come here and you're going to have such low prices and reliable energy that you can dream as big as you want, I think we could be attracting a whole bunch of business to British Columbia without having to spend $5.5 billion taxpayers' dollars to get them to come here and invest.
Mo, you're
okay. Well, there's a lot.
You're on the receiving end.
No, that's fine, and that's cool, right? I mean, look, we're government, and we're going to get things done. We have been doing them. We're going to continue doing them. So we live in a high wage environment. High interest rate, high inflation environment right now. So the best antidote to that is to try to create a high wage economy. And in terms of business, it means you have to do specific things to help out each sector in specific ways to become prosperous. And it's fair enough for you, Yuri, to sort of speak in generalities. So let me be specific, and I'd happily like to talk to some around some of the things that you guys are proposing as well in a few minutes. But let's look at the specifics. First of all, we have the small business sector. How do we help them out? Well, frankly, the way we have to help them out is we have to reduce the cost of doing business. How do we do that? What have we done as a government? Well, we talked to the small business sector last year, going into the budget. Their number one ask was to eliminate the employer health tax. We eliminated it for 90% of the businesses. Before that, their number one ask was to reduce the taxation rate on business. It was 2.5%. We reduced it by 20% to 2%. That's a decision that we made that because we're attentive to their concerns about reducing the cost of business. There are other sectors that require different forms of assistance. For example, you take the film and television sector. That's a sector that does really well, but we can do better. They came to us, they said, okay, how can we help you in terms of being able to attract more jobs to British Columbia? They said, what you need to do is you need to change the tax credit system to make it more lucrative and reward us every time we hire a new employee. We announced we're going to do that during the course of this election campaign. That creates 7,000 new jobs in British Columbia. We went to mining. Right? Look, we've got 16 mines ready to go here in British Columbia. Critical minerals, as I talked about earlier, is a critical attribute of our future economy. We went to them and said, okay, what do we have to do to help you become more prosperous? And they said, well, you need to invest in infrastructure. So we built a $176 million road through the Northwest to be able to give access to those mines. We invested $746 million through BC Hydro to be able to provide them with electricity. That's what they asked for. That's what they got. Now, I can go through every other sector that you want to
unfortunately, we don't have time.
But let me make this point. Look, here's the risk in British Columbia, and there's two of them. The first one is this. We have a political party in terms of the Conservatives that want to get rid of UNDRIP. Now, think about that for a moment. Just think about that for a moment. For the last 4 years, by consensus unanimous in the legislature of British Columbia, we brought forward a scheme that gave both reconciliation, economic reconciliation for First Nations and certainty towards business. Mr. Rustad has said that he wants to do away with UNDRIP. Now think about what don't think about what I had to say, just think about what the First Nations leaders had to say. They said that it's going to turn us back 40 years. We're going to go back to confrontation. We're going to go back to chaos. We're going to go back to the courts making decisions. If you want economic certainty in British Columbia, you have to be able to use the vehicle of UNDRIP to be able to have the reconciliation and certainty that we've created in sectors like mining that I just talked about. That is going to be fatal to this economy. The second thing, if you talk to any of the leading economists around the world, they say that the economies of the future are going to be the green power, the generators of power in terms of clean energy. Now, if you listen to Mr. Rustad, he says two things. He says he's going to get rid of the carbon tax. We can talk about that later. But then he says one other thing. He says he's going to get rid of the low carbon fuel standards. Now, think about that for a moment. We have hydrogen companies in British Columbia. 50% of the hydrogen companies, which is the fuel of the future, in Canada are head office here in British Columbia. We have a company called HCHEC, for example, that is going to spend $900 million, create 280 jobs, develop new hydroprocessing facilities in Prince George, in Nanaimo, and in Burnaby, make a major investment in British Columbia because of those low carbon fuel standards. If we want to win the race to be an economic superpower, we need to have those standards. If you want to quit that race and go back, you get rid of the low carbon fuel standards. So his party is proposing doing that.
Ira, I saw you wanting to jump in almost right away as Mo was talking about what he was doing for small business.
Thank you, Stuart. High labor cost and high payroll cost are making BC really a very challenging and expensive place to do business, to open a business, to operate a business. Just to put a little bit of context for that, for every dollar we generate in GDP, we spend around 76 cents on labor. That's the third highest in Canada. BC also faces the second highest payroll cost in the country and one of the only mandatory paid sick leave. So the rising cost of doing business is really struggling many small business owners right now. And so my question to the panelists is, how does your party plan to commit reducing the cost of doing business, and will your party commit to reviewing the paid sick leave policy?
So just can I have a follow-up? Mo pointed out that there were a wide range of measures that the current government has put in place to try and address the issues of small business. Do you believe that they have been successful?
We really appreciated increasing the employer health tax payroll exemption threshold from $500,000 to $1 million. Actually, Sonia was one of our allies on that fight, so we really appreciate that. But it's still low compared to other jurisdictions. In Manitoba, that threshold is $2.25 million. In Ontario, I believe it's 1.5. So we're improving, but the rising cost of doing business continues to put a hold on small business owners, continues to kind of limit their ability to thrive, to hire, to expand. And that's something that should be tackled, which is why we want to see the parties kind of propose this fiscal tools or regulatory tools aiming at reducing the cost of doing business, aiming at reviewing paid sick leave policy, for example. So
go back to your question. Your question to the panelists is?
It's how does your party plan to reduce the cost of doing business, and will your party commit to reviewing paid sick leave?
Yuri, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So one, we're not going to reduce the small business tax rate by 25%. We're actually going to halve it. So it's going to go from 2% to 1% under a Conservative government. So that's money right away, right available right now. The employer health tax is a really good question here. So they raised the limit to $1 million. That was a small gesture to business. But I was just talking to a restaurateur in Whistler. This is one restaurant, so it's a single restaurateur. One restaurant, his payroll's over $1 million, right? Because the high cost of labor. It's a Whistler base, so high cost of labor. So this is still a small business, right? So we've exempted some small businesses, but we're not even close. The $1 million threshold does not leave it for big business. It's still small business. It's still individual restaurateurs suffering. And we're in a regulatory environment where, again, talking to another restaurateur, I come from the restaurant sector originally, talking to another restaurateur who's waited a year for a building permit to put a restaurant in the same space that there used to be a restaurant. So, we've got a regulatory environment that doesn't serve business. We've got a tax situation that doesn't serve business. And, everything that the NDP's done over the last 7 years has, if anything has been done, it's in tiny increments. The reality was the NDP dumped the employer health tax on business to solve a problem for the government. Business has been the dumping ground for government over the last 7 years, and business just can't afford it anymore. So we're in the situation we're in.
So Mo, specifically to Jairo's question, what more can you do?
Okay, we can do a number of things, and we are doing a number of things. So thank you very much for acknowledging that we made that change in employer health tax. And let's remember, 90% of the businesses in British Columbia no longer pay the employer health tax. So it wasn't a tweaking or a tinkering. It was a substantive change in terms of what happened there. But look, for businesses to be successful, what we got to do is we got to work with you to get more customers, to use that as an example. So for example, if you're in the tourism and hospitality sector, we as a government went out, bid, and secured the Grey Cup. We went out and bid and secured FIFA. We went out and bid and secured the Invictus Games. Those are kinds of things that governments have to do in a far-reaching way to expend your tax dollars to get more customers here to stay at hotels and enjoy the benefits of our hospitality sector. In other cases, we have to remove red tape. I'll give you an example again. In the wine sector, which is a $3.4 billion industry in British Columbia, we looked at what was happening in that sector, and we said, okay, now just hang on. What do you mean? You need 8 different licenses to be able to move wine from point A to point B. This is, by the way, set up under the previous government. We took a look at it and we reduced it to one single license so the entrepreneur can decide where, how, and when to serve wine, consistent with the rules that we have in the province. So then at times you got to make regulatory change. We've done it for wine. At times you got to make long-term investments to get you customers. We also did other things that were interesting during the course of the pandemic. If you take a look at the pandemic, our economy was forecast to suffer significantly in British Columbia. In fact, if you take a look at the government's budget at the time, the deficit was forecast to be $9.7 billion. We came in with a $463 million surplus. Why is that? because we worked with business to keep things running during the course of the pandemic. Construction, for example, continued on an ongoing basis, and other sectors as well. So the idea was to try to work with business, be attentive to your concerns, and to bring forward policies that respond. Do we live in a perfect world, and have we got all of it? No. Are we going to reduce the minimum wage? No. Are we going to get rid of the sick leave provisions? No, I'll be candid about that, because people deserve sick leave and people deserve to be paid a decent work for the work that they do. But are we going to build a prosperous economy by listening to business and making some of the changes? Yes, the record shows that, and we'll continue to do it.
Sonia, and then David.
Okay. Small and medium-sized businesses are, really what make our communities vibrant and wonderful. When we go out and we visit small and medium-sized independent businesses and we get to know the people, I think about Duncan and the great policy that the city council made, which was the downtown core is only small independent businesses, and it has made that town just an absolute gem. A couple things that we're seeing and hearing from businesses right now. One is around rents. We've had several businesses in Victoria, including a really lovely grocery store in Cook Street Village, have to close down because their rent went up to $28,000 a month. We had the mayor of New West, Patrick Johnstone, who said to the provincial government, hey, how about you let us as municipalities make some special zoning where we protect small and medium-sized businesses from these massive rent increases, the way that we are looking at protecting people from residential rent increases. So that's one thing that I think would be helpful. On the sick leave, we've talked about this, and I brought this up in estimates and are in bill debate with the minister, is looking at it more like insurance. And so having all businesses pay in, but according to their size. And then that way it's more like a employment insurance approach where the sick leave is covered, but it's not necessarily covered by small businesses for whom the burden of that is much higher than it is, for example, on a business like Walmart. I think it's really important. And again, government has a responsibility to ensure that we're focused on keeping people healthy. We don't want people who are sick to be going to work. We don't want them to make their other fellow staff members sick. We don't want them to make the public sick. So we definitely want people to stay home when they're sick. But I think there are ways to take the burden off of small businesses as an approach to do that. And finally, one of the things in our platform that we've proposed is to have hospitality and restaurant training programs covered so that the cost of that training for small businesses, and I know that can be significant, is actually relieved as a burden from them. And you've got a better trained workforce in the hospitality sector to be able to go out and do a really good job on behalf of their employees and on behalf of the people that they're serving. So I think there's ways that we can recognize the value and the absolutely incredible importance of small and medium-sized businesses in BC, and the ways that government can help to ensure that that those burdens aren't too big, but also holding up its end of the responsibility of protecting the health and well-being of people. And, when we have the conditions we do where the wages that people earn are so out of line with the cost of housing and the cost of rent, that's part of the problem we have, because fewer and fewer people can feel like they can go and spend money in those small businesses. So it's a complex and complicated place that we're at. And I think we need political parties to be focused on understanding the underlying conditions, what got us here, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, how do we measure that more effectively. We have a government in the last 4 years in particular that loves to talk about how much money they're spending on things, but we're not getting the measuring of did that actually achieve the results that you're looking for. And, back to our platform, a well-being framework does put those measurements in place to ensure that how government is spending its money is being spent effectively. I am very concerned about how much money this government is spending, and how little we're getting on the other side of that $89 billion.
I'm going to jump in here now, Sonia, and ask David Williams to also respond, because I know that we all like to say small business is the backbone of the economy. I'm a small business owner myself, and I'm not the backbone of the economy. I'm not generating all the other services that big businesses bring. And
are you the funny bone of the economy?
yeah, maybe. It can feel that way at times because it's very challenging. We also have to turn our attention to how do we ensure that the substantial employers and the major companies in British Columbia want to continue to grow, prosper, and reinvest in British Columbia. David, from your perspective, where are we at from that point of view, and what question would you like to pose to the candidates here, or to our panelists?
Well, one thing to point out, I mentioned that BC looks good in the Canadian context and terrible relative to its own history with growth, per capita growth slowing. One of the things that's been in BC's favour in recent years has been the mega capital projects, Trans Mountain, Site C, LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink. Together, those projects add up to something like $65 billion spread out over several years since the mid-2010s. They are absolutely massive. Our economy is about $330 billion per annum, so that's a sense of scale. They're huge. They're once-in-a-generation projects, and they're all coming to an end. They're all finishing this year. So the question is, BC's economy is going to start to look a lot more like the rest of Canada, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a bit of a basket case compared to any other OECD advanced country. The mega projects are gone. We're not going to be able to rely on them. There's nothing really coming in down the pipeline that even comes close to them. And as you say, large businesses, they're the anchor businesses in the economy. They're the ones that are the customers of small businesses. The workers of large businesses are the customers of small businesses. Large businesses are more likely to be involved in the export sector. They're more likely to do R&D. They're more likely to invest in capital equipment, technological innovation, and all these sorts of things. So these companies are essential if we want to raise our standard of living. If you were looking at the natural resource sector and you added in the gateway economy, the ports, the airport, the road and the rail links, that's about two-thirds of our export. That's about two-thirds of our export earnings right there. So, if we don't look after the large businesses that are operating at scale, where it's more productive to operate, then we're sort of going to have stagnating or falling standards of living, which is what we're seeing. I'll just make a point. In former rugby player here, we used to say, look at the scoreboard. So when you look at private sector job creation, there's essentially been no private sector job creation since 2019. Very, very little. That is unusual in the Federation. All other provinces have generated private sector job growth. So we've had the least growth in private sector jobs of any province, and we've had the most growth in public sector employment. So the only reason we were getting any serious growth in total employment is really coming from the public sector. I think the private sector, again, is voting with their feet. Once you look through the impact of the mega capital projects, there's not a whole lot left that's happening in the private sector, and that does concern us.
Sean, we have a question number 3 here. Can you read that? Because I think it takes us to the other end of the spectrum and what governments need to do to make sure that everybody has access to employment.
Thank you, Stuart. From Matthew Smedley. Data shows that inclusive employment makes communities both safer and decreases crime. How will your party ensure that those experiencing poverty are not criminalized for it and have increasing access to inclusive and supportive employment?
Mo?
Well, the way we do that is make investments in education and in post-secondary education and train people to have the jobs that are in demand and the jobs that are going to be in the demand in the future. That's what we're doing. For example, we've created 5,900 new seats in the technology sector to be able to make sure that our kids and people that are currently underemployed have the ability to go to school and get an education that will take them to a higher wage environment for them and their family. That's how you do it. You make investments in education because it's the great equalizer in society. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to create those kinds of opportunities for people so that they can get ahead. I want to talk about the point that was made earlier on. I'll do it right now about the fact that these large mega projects are coming to a conclusion, because I think there's a clear answer to what's going to replace them. Can I do that now, or do you want me to do that later?
Let's wait, okay? Because I want to address the question that's before us at the moment. Yuri?
Yeah, so I think Mo's partially right. So we're in agreement again. I think the focus is on education, but I think it's focused on targeted education. So we can't just broadly educate everybody. We have to say what jobs are in demand in the economy today, and perhaps even more importantly, what's going to be in demand in the future. We're in an economy where the needs of business change so rapidly that we have to be in tune with that, and our post-secondary institutions have to be in tune with that so that we're actually creating employees that are going to be ready for an economy a couple of years from now. So I think that's point one. I think point two is, if we're really going to enable employment for people with barriers or multiple barriers to employment, we need inclusive employment support for that. Right? It's not simply about post-secondary, because a lot of those folks aren't going to be ready today to attend post-secondary. It's really about a transition plan that allows people who perhaps have had a single or multiple barriers to productive employment to be able to overcome some of those barriers. And I think that's what you do in a caring society. I mean, the goal for everybody, and I'm going to say the goal for all three of us on this stage, is to get British Columbians to be more prosperous. We may disagree on how to do that. And prosperous not just financially, but in terms of well-being and people's comfort to be in the workforce. So I think we do that by being incredibly caring about the least fortunate so that we can return them to the workforce. The best solution to poverty is well-paying jobs and employment for people who need it. And if we have to help people overcome a couple of barriers to do that, I think that's what the role of government is, and that's what our government wants to do.
Sonia?
Yeah, I agree with Yuri. I think we really do have to look at encouraging inclusiveness in workplaces, finding ways that the government can support that, recognizing that there's 1 in 3 British Columbians that will experience disability at some time in their lives. So this is a very significant question to be asking, and a very important one. And the education piece, I think the barriers are significant to education, and they are financial. I was just helping my 17-year-old apply for university, and when you look at the cost of tuition right now, that is a significant barrier to a lot of people. And our universities have become really financially out of reach for too many people, which means that we're losing that potential and that capacity of people to engage in the economy. We know how much post-secondary education, trades programs, extra education benefits people and our society, and to be oriented towards making sure that everybody who wants to get more education has that capacity and ability to do so is critical. But I agree. We should not be, the question included criminalizing poverty. I'm very concerned about that. And poverty is a result of policy choices. And we've had policy choices in this province for a long time that have increasingly left people behind. We saw the cuts in the early 2000s to a lot of social programs. We saw the cuts to education funding. We have had policy choices that have created greater and deeper poverty in this province. We need policy choices that turn that around.
So I want to come back, Mo, to the point about where do we go now that these mega projects have concluded. You point out the fact that there's 16 mines that are technically ready to go, but they're running into challenges clearing the permitting process. And so we want to encourage investment, but it's as though in British Columbia there are so many barriers to being able to realize those opportunities. And I know that you want to respond to what David was, but I'm throwing that out on the table as well.
Let's try to deal with both of those. Okay, on the first one, David, look, you're right. A number of projects that have helped strengthen our economy are coming to an end. No doubt about that. And there's no doubt that we have to make sure that we reoccupy the field and make sure that other projects move forward. And what does that mean? You mentioned this before. LNG Canada, LNG 2, Cedar are all proceeding. They've decided that they're going to make their investments. Woodfibre, $5.1 billion project, is proceeding. But the one that I find most interesting is the $3.6 billion investment that is being made at Tilbury Island by Fortis. And that's a critical project. People don't realize that how damaging the pollution is that's caused by ships as they make their way from Hong Kong to Japan and through the Aleutian Islands into Alaska, through BC and down to California. The marine industries are a significant contributor to climate change. And what we've done through the policies that we've introduced both federally and provincially is we are now moving those ships off of dirty bunker fuel onto cleaner fuel. There's a $3.6 billion project that's got now its environmental certificate to proceed in British Columbia to be able to provide cleaner fuel, natural gas in this case, at Tilbury Island. You forgot to mention that. And it's important. You also forgot to mention that the provincial government, recognizing that we have to create more energy, electricity in British Columbia, is investing $36 billion in new energy projects in terms of transmission, distribution, and substations. That's really important. Why is that important? Because the most significant economic advantage we have in attracting investment to British Columbia is our cheap power rates. We have the third lowest power rates for industrial and commercial users in North America because of our cheap power. And we use that to attract industry to come to British Columbia. Super important that government then build out that infrastructure from that perspective, and also because we know we need to, in the face of climate change, we know we have to electrify our province to reduce the emissions and reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. That's important. Now take a look, because we're in an election here in terms of the choice that we are faced with now. We as a government are saying we're going to make more investments in electricity, $36 billion. The Conservatives are arguing that they want to make more nuclear power in British Columbia, create a whole new industry in nuclear power. Why you would bring in nuclear stations into an area that's prone to earthquakes is one question. But more importantly, from an economic point of view, we know from Ontario that the landed cost of producing nuclear power is 22 cents a kilowatt hour. It's 11 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. Why would you want to create a power source that is twice expensive? We're talking about decreasing the burden on business from a cost point of view. The Conservatives are talking through nuclear energy to increase the burden on communities. And not only that, they want to sprinkle them all over British Columbia. I mean, is it going to be in your constituency? Is it going to be in Surrey, Langley, Abbotsford? Where are we going to build these nuclear reactors? It makes no sense. What makes sense in British Columbia is to proceed with the development of electrical power. And as you know, David, in terms of mega project, putting aside the province, we just made a call for more power, $3.6 billion in private sector projects were submitted to be able to meet that call for power. We're going to build a cleaner economy. We're going to build a greener economy. Now, ask yourself this question. You have to believe that climate change is real. If you want to begin to make these changes, to change fundamentally the way in which we power our economy. Guess who doesn't believe that climate change is real?
Mo, you gotta Sonia, and then we'll come back to your
I feel dizzy from all of the spinning here. I really do.
Oh, really?
Because we have it's maybe just because I'm but we have a lobbyist for the LNG industry list off a whole bunch of LNG projects as the evidence for what a great job BC's doing in new projects, ignoring the fact that, again, the International Energy Agency is basically yelling from the rooftops that there's not going to be demand for this. Germany came to Canada a couple of weeks ago and said, we aren't going to take your gas. We're not interested in it. Qatar can make the gas for a thousandth of the price that we can. And so what Mo is proposing is what seems to me in a few years to be a whole bunch of stranded assets. But then he wants to talk about climate change. And so now he's ignoring the peer-reviewed Cornell report and the reports that have come out again and again on LNG, that it is not good for climate. It's in fact worse than coal. And so I don't know what's worse. Is someone saying, I don't really believe the science of climate change, or somebody saying, I believe in climate change so much, but what we're going to do to respond to that is a whole bunch more fossil fuel infrastructure. Like, I can't make this make sense. No, please don't. I think
It's your
what
happy.
BC needs to be thinking about is yes, we've been for a long time we've seen ourselves, and there's been a significant amount of resource extraction and exporting of resources to other jurisdictions. And I think that BC can now start to imagine itself as moving into becoming a much stronger secondary economy and a much stronger tertiary economy, where we're building things here, where we're using resources that we're extracting here. We're not sending them off raw. We're actually creating industry here and then shipping off things that we've built and created. And we're getting much more bang for our buck of those resources if we're actually creating the jobs and the industries here. So the provincial government should be working with municipalities to find out, how are we going to create better access to industrial land? How are we going to incentivize manufacturing? How are we going to go back to education and start to attract the best and the brightest minds here? Because this is a place to study. This is a place where we take innovation and technology and a clean tech and a clean energy economy seriously. But if we keep saying those things, but then putting our money into the 20th century kind of icons of economy for BC, we're going to get left behind. And I don't want us to be left behind. I want us to be leaders. I want us to think of a different vision and a bolder future for British Columbia that isn't a whole bunch of fossil fuel infrastructure that doesn't have any value because the rest of the world has moved on without us.
Okay, Yuri.
There's a lot to unpack here. So I just to hit a couple of things that Mo touched on. I think it would be absolute news to the mining sector that there are 16 mining projects all ready to go in the province. Moa, it would be
news to
absolutely.
you.
Well,
John Rustad said it the other day at the BC Board of
I
Trade.
think they're ready to go if permits were issued, and the challenge is that the permits haven't been issued. So I think that
That's what you think. That's not what. But let's deal with fact, not fiction.
why. Your facts and David over there's facts seem to be vastly different. So I'm not
asking
quite
you.
sure.
I'm asking you to
I've
specify
answered-
which of those 16 projects you're saying are caught up in regulation.
Well, list the 16 projects. I can't answer to.
Well, if you don't know them, but we can look
let's
at.
not play tit for tat on who
I
knows
can
what.
tell you one right now. Skeena Resources is sitting there at that point right now. I was talking to them, and they went, "We've got money, we've got equipment, we've got workforce. We don't have a permip." And
shocking.
Nathan
So
Cullen
is that a fact?
Nathan Cullen admitted that the process of streamlining the regulatory process is very challenging, and it is holding back development. Anyways, let's let Yuri finish.
I've politely listened to you guys for a little bit, so maybe I can talk for a little while. I think it's a reality in British Columbia. We're a net importer of power now. 25% of our power comes from outside of British Columbia. A lot of it's coal-fired. It's not the cleanest power in the world. The other issue is that 1/3 of the heat in British Columbia is generated by natural gas. So we've got a reality that we're dependent both on power from outside of British Columbia, and we're also dependent on natural gas. And we aren't meeting our power needs. And if we were to switch to electric heat province-wide and electric cars province-wide, which is what the policy is right now, we'd need 25 Site Cs. It's just not possible. So we do have to diversify our power needs. We released policy on this week. We do have to think differently about power. And throwing rhetoric around about what power we should be talking about, I think isn't really the productive way forward. I think we need to put everything on the table for discussion. Nuclear is one thing we need to put on the table for discussion. We're not advocating for nuclear. We're simply saying that British Columbians need to consider what their power needs are, not for next week, not for next year, but for generations ahead. And we need to have a discussion amongst the people of the province of what are they prepared to do, what are they prepared to pay for, and what are the needs going to look like. And I think that's the discussion British Columbians want to have. I don't think they want to be, frankly, lectured by politicians. I think British Columbians want to have the facts in front of them and make good decisions about how to generate power in this province, because the needs are growing. Under the present regulations, the needs are escalating dramatically, and we need to have a discussion with good, hard-working British Columbians about what they're prepared to pay for and what sacrifices they're prepared to make. The last thing they need is government lecturing them. And that's all I hear from my colleagues here, is lecturing them about what's good for British Columbians. Let's let British Columbians for once decide what might be good for them.
You're talking about one of our future panels. Now, we're starting to run out of time. And so I'd like to have closing comments. Our objective today was to take a look at the economy and how we can move it forward so that British Columbians can have a higher quality of life, lower cost of living compared to wages and salaries. And so on that theme, I ask each of you to give me your closing thoughts. How do we improve the quality of living for people? How do we increase productivity, which isn't just personal productivity, but the ability of workers to be able to produce more for effort? And that usually comes through technology and investment in machinery and so on. What is it that we need to do to be able to improve the quality of living here in relationship to the high cost of living? And I'm going to work my way back, down, and forth, not in a row. But David, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll work my way through the panel.
Thanks very much. I think one of the places that we can start, and we haven't really talked about it too much, is the government's own budget. That is one thing it can control. Some of the things we just talked about before around what industries will be successful, that's largely a decision for the market to decide. If investors want to put their own money into projects, they will. If global customers want to buy our products, and they are, they will. Our number one export is forestry, and energy a close second. So you just look at the economy that we have and what people are buying from us now, and that gives us a pretty good clue about where we make our money, where we make our earnings. The government, I think, can mind its own shop in a way, because the rest of the province is having to watch its pennies, and the government isn't. I mean, we're running a $9 billion deficit and another $18 billion in capital spending. Now, all of those things might be have some virtue, and that might be what you want to do, but households know that you can't afford everything that you want to do at all times. We've had 3 credit rating downgrades in the last 3 years. We used to have a AAA credit rating from S&P Global. Now it's AA- with a negative outlook. Moody's, which gives us a AAA rating, but it assumes that the federal government will bail us out in the event of a default. They've given us a negative outlook for its rating, and said that, and both of them have said, and these two agencies control about 80% of the global bond ratings market. They've said that we're on a downward track. Basically, we're at a turning point in the province's financial management, and they've also said we'll have the worst fiscal situation of any peer jurisdiction. So subnational jurisdictions like the other Canadian provinces, the Swiss cantons, and the Australian provinces. So it's a pretty concerning track. It's nothing to do with fiscal equalisation. We've had, payments to the rest of the provinces through fiscal equalisation for decades, but we've always maintained good fiscal management here with a AAA credit rating. Not anymore. We've been buffeted by the same global forces as other jurisdictions, but we're the ones with the $9 billion deficit. And I think the thing that really strikes me is that during the pandemic, when the economy was largely shut down, unemployment was 13.5%, and the government rightly ran a deficit of about 1.8% of GDP. That made sense to do at that time in 2020. Today, that budget deficit is 2.1% of GDP, and the unemployment rate's 5.8%, so half, basically. So we're running pandemic-era emergency levels of government spending, and we can't continue to do it. It's going to cost us more and more to borrow to fund that deficit. And then what are we getting for it? As I said at the very, very start, is the outlook for per capita incomes in the province, according to the government's own budget, are falling by 2% last year, 1.5% this year, and expected to be lower in 2028 than 2022. So from the business sector's perspective, we'd like have some faith in the market forces to decide what people want to buy from us, and get out of the way a little bit more on that to let BC be open for business, and for the government to focus on the things that the government should be doing. providing health, education, building schools and so forth, and doing it on a cost-effective basis, managing the pennies. So that's what we'd like to see from the business community.
Sonia, from your perspective, what can we do to improve incomes and address this high cost of living?
Yeah, I agree that government should be focused on doing its job and doing it well and doing it in a cost-effective way. I think we have seen an enormous amount of increase in spending and not a lot of indication that that spending is effective at solving the healthcare crisis, at making sure kids aren't going to school in portables, at making sure that we have an effective public transportation system that gets people to jobs and to shops and to where they need to go. And then I think we have to have a government that is willing to be really clear and open about how it's measuring, how it's spending its money, and whether it's getting those outcomes. We get a lot of good stories out of the government communications machinery that, as we've pointed out this evening, it doesn't match what people are experiencing in their lives. It doesn't match what people are feeling in their communities. I do want to say that to ignore climate change is probably one of the most foolish things that government and businesses could do. If we look at 2021, the cost of the atmospheric river, the heat domes, and the wildfires that year was calculated to be $10 to $17 billion of our economy. We look at the impacts of climate change on rising insurance rates in BC, up 18%. We look at the costs on things like water scarcity. The drought that we've been in this summer has impacted businesses all over BC. I've worked with businesses in the Cowichan Valley who have been told that they can't use the water that they need to use to be able to run their businesses. We cannot ignore the significant impact of climate change to our economy, to business, to the well-being of people. I look at Florida right now. We have a governor in Florida who won't say the word climate change, and those hurricanes don't care. They don't care that he doesn't believe in climate change. So a serious government in these times would be working not only to provide those basic services that we agree on, but also recognizing they have to look ahead to the decades that are coming, to get in front of that, the mitigation that we have to do on the ground, and to really commit to moving us to a cleaner economy that can help us navigate these difficult times ahead and ensure that the people in BC and the communities in BC are the most resilient they can be. And I think that it's worrying to me that we are in an election in 2024, seeing the kinds of impacts we've seen from climate change in the last 5 and 10 years. The oceans are the warmest they've ever been. The surface temperature is the warmest they've ever been. We're seeing storms unlike anything we've ever seen in the world. And to kind of cover your ears and say, no, it's not happening is foolish, frankly. And it's a very serious responsibility of government right now.
Hyro.
Well, the message here is simple. This election is not just about choosing a government, but shaping the future of our economy, of making sure that all businesses, in particular small businesses, have the opportunity to thrive, to contribute to a prosperous British Columbia. I talk to small business owners all the time, and their number one concern has been the skyrocketing cost of doing business. So policies that can reduce the cost of doing business, policies that can restore confidence that BC is open for businesses, that it's a place for where small businesses can thrive and contribute to a prosperous British Columbia is definitely something that can correct course and put us back on track.
Mo?
Well, I agree with Sonia that climate change is the existential threat to everything. The planet is on fire. And we see that. We see forest fires here in British Columbia. We see freeze events that kill our crops. We see atmospheric river events. And we have to take climate change very seriously. And we have to be able to change the architecture, the fundamental architecture of our economy to address climate change. And that means, for example, producing more food here in British Columbia year-round. We can do that by making a number of changes in terms of our regulatory framework. But it also means staying the course in terms of the low carbon fuel standards that we brought forward here in British Columbia to begin to attract the clean energy sector. We cannot forego the race or being in the race to be able to make British Columbia the leader in the production of green power. The greatest threat in terms of the choice that you have to make in this election, as I said earlier on, with Mr. Rustad, is he doesn't believe in the science of climate change, and he wants to get rid of the low carbon fuel standards that have brought forward 50% of the hydrogen companies to locate here in British Columbia. Of all the ones in Canada, locate right here in Canada. We brought that forward, those regulations. We cannot afford, if we want to deal with climate change, to allow them to be rescinded. That's what Mr. Rustad wants to do. Risk number one. Risk number two is this. Business wants certainty. Before investment capital comes to a jurisdiction, they want to see certainty. We've achieved enormous certainty in British Columbia through UNDRIP. And I talked about that earlier, and I want to emphasize that point because that really should be the second takeaway here. Economic reconciliation is happening in British Columbia. It's a reality. And as a result of that, we're seeing our major industries enter into partnerships with First Nations and have certainty in the sense that their businesses will grow and prosper in conjunction with First Nations. Mr. Rustad has said that he wants to get rid of UNDRIP. That is going to take us back to chaos. It's a risk that we can ill afford.
Yuri, last word to you.
Well, thank you. And honored to get the last word. I mean, I'm the newbie politician up here, right? My colleagues have all spent a lot of time on stages like this, and I started this journey the first week of June. So I'm getting up to speed, and it's been a really interesting journey because as part of this, I get to knock on a lot of doors and I get to talk to a lot of British Columbians. And because I have a 30-year history in business and a 30-year history as a volunteer and a leader in the social sector and the not-for-profit sector, I get to talk to a lot of different people. And, until about partway through Mo's conversation, I'd actually agreed with almost everything I'd heard. Right? I think everybody's right. I think what people want from their government is leadership on a lot of issues. I think people want the free market to navigate where capital goes. I think people want to be taken care of by their government. But I think people want responsibility from their government. And I think a $9 billion deficit doesn't make sense to British Columbians. I think they look at that and they say, I'm not allowed to manage my household that way. I can't spend more than I make in perpetuity. The business world, we sure know we can't do that. But we've got a province that's doing that. And I don't think that's sustainable. And I think British Columbians fundamentally get that the government spending's out of control, and that the government's just going to keep coming back to them for more and more money because we're not diversifying the economy. And contrary to what Mo said, business isn't coming to British Columbia. British Columbia has announced to the world under the NDP government that's essentially closed. Right? And that to me is the biggest disappointment. As a small business person, as somebody who talks to small business people, that's a huge disappointment because that leaves us no hope for the future. The other thing that's shocked me, and the beautiful part about being an aspiring politician, is you get to talk to people about the things that bother them most in their life. Right? You stand on somebody's doorstep and they tell you intimate details of their life. They tell you about what they can't afford. They tell you about the health issues they face. They tell you about education issues for their children. And it was an unexpected honor for me. I didn't know this was going to happen. But not one person has told me that they are better off today after 7 years with the NDP. Not one single door have I knocked on where somebody said, you know what, I'm actually a lot more prosperous today. The world is better for me today than it was 7 years ago. Not a single one. And I think that's the change British Columbians are looking for today. I think they're saying, I want a government that actually stands up for me and wants me to be better off in life. Because there are a lot of crises. My friends have summarized it well. Climate change is a huge issue in the province. We live in a beautiful province. We want to keep it beautiful. We also have an affordability crisis. We have a housing crisis. We didn't touch on it today because it was a different topic, but we have a healthcare system in crisis. We have a lot of crises in front of British Columbians. And the choice is now, who do you think actually has your back as an individual? Who do you think is going to change that economic trajectory of your life, small business person, taxpayer, employee, British Columbian? Who do you think is going to help you change that trajectory? Because I tell you, under 7 years under the NDP, we are all worse off. So I think it's time for change, and I think that's what British Columbians are telling us.
Well, I think you're right. British Columbians are asking that question. under which government will my life improve? Economically, how will the economy of British Columbia improve? I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I mean, it's a spirited, lively, combative conversation, but I enjoyed it, learned lots, and I wish you all great success in this election. I applaud each of you for your contribution to our province. You do so because you're passionate, and no matter what political position you come from, you do so because you care about British Columbia. Thank you very much. And of course, same with David and Hyro, you care about the sectors that you represent. Thank you very much for being here. You all get to take your coveted Conversations Live mug home as a memento of this wonderful experience. And just before we go, I want to just ask you once again to consider any way in which you can support Mission Possible. They do extraordinary work. I mean, they're talking about what they do is to help to get people back into the workforce, which is, as we've been talking about today, is vitally important for all of us. So thank you. Thank you for those who are watching us online. Good evening. Thank you for tuning into Conversations Live, an Oh Boy Productions program. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find our previous and upcoming episodes at conversationslive.ca. You can also follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Again, thank you. I'm Stuart McNish.